Hello and welcome back. I'm Bryan Rios from Wahl+Case. I'm here today with Joshua Grant
Hello.
and our guest, Alfonso Asensio,
Hello.
the Managing Director of Jellyfish. Alfonso, how are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great.
Thank you for being here. Can you give us a little bit about yourself and then also Jellyfish, which is the company you're the Managing Director of?
So I've been in Japan on and off now, coming for 20 years. I used to be the country manager for Oracle Advertising here in Tokyo. Before that, I was with a Silicon-based digital agency, and I did spend long term of my career, around 10 years, with Japanese domestic companies like Sega and Bandai and a few of them. So very interesting work to be done here in Japan around everything data, everything analytics, and everything digital. And yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here. As usual, we're going to run through two big news topics that are being discussed in the ad tech industry. And then we're going to dive into our main topic for today, which is we're going to talk about e-commerce in Japan. What is it? How big is it? Who are the major players? And what does the future look like for e-commerce? So let's get started. Okay, so jumping into kind of the first big topic of the week, there were a couple of stories going around, but there was one in particular that I wanted to talk about. It was quite interesting because it seems like last week the big topic was everyone was sort of suing everyone. So we know Elon Musk was suing OpenAI. There were also some lawsuits that were going through around AI in relation to copyright. But one of the big lawsuits that I saw that was quite interesting that slipped a little bit under the radar was there's a number of European media groups and publishers that are suing Google for about $2.2 billion. And the claim there is that because of Google's dominance in the advertising market and also their ability to offer their advertising services quite low, that this is affecting the pockets of some of these major media groups. And so it started with sort of two big publishers in Germany, but then it's sort of spread throughout sort of the EU markets. And one of the reasons that I wanted to bring this up is because it speaks to, I think, a larger trend that we're seeing, which is sort of private entities pushing governmental regulatory bodies to find some way to manage, I think, the growth trajectory of some of these big tech companies. And so I looked it up to see, but there are about 15 to 20 active lawsuits in the EU from various EU countries against big tech over sort of unfair practices. And then obviously we know that there are other markets doing this. So Japan has some legal lawsuits against big tech as well, and then the US as well. And so it seems to be, I think, two things, which is one, from what we saw with like the viral video of the senator, I'm Singaporean, when the TikTok CEO was asked if he was affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party. Two, I think, where we see actually sort of real legislation like GDPR. But it seems to be this sort of continued momentum on how do we deal with this, and I'm not quite sure if we've quite figured it out, or even if the governmental bodies have figured it out. But I would love to know you guys' thoughts on this.
For me, it kind of goes back to what is the core of the industry, right? Because at the end of the day, is who monopolizes attention, like the attention metric that then funnels through advertising, which is the economic engine of the industry, right? And at a given point, all of that started to get centralized through the platforms that centralize attention, like Google, the Facebook, the Twitters, and then traditional publishers, they lost that battle for the attention of the public. For me, there is a bit of a glimmer of hope in terms of the New York Times have done a very good job of pivoting from advertising support business to subscription base. And it is rough for them. And if you are a podcast listener, they are always asking for your support. But it works because it gives them independence from the chokehold that the big tech companies might have on advertising business. So I think at least that might be in the right direction. But I think at the end of the day, it comes as long as the industry is funded by ads and the attention is shifting to the big platforms. Lawsuits, I think they only address the symptoms rather than the cause.
Yeah. Do you think that I mean, again, like when we talk about like the U.S. Senate hearings that we saw, I mean, they were completely laughable, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
does Facebook connect to home Wi-Fi and all of these sort of ridiculous questions? I think the EU is doing a bit of a better job, but do you think that the right people are there to regulate? I mean, it would seem that there's a lack of understanding from, I think, many of the governmental institutions to really even understand how these platforms work, let alone be able to create regulation around it. Because I think what you don't want is you don't want like a blunt instrument where it's like, okay, this is now illegal or you can't do this, because I think that stifles a bit of the innovation. And that's kind of what a lot of the big tech companies argue. So do you think the right people are involved in this, or do you think that it's kind of maybe they should bring in other people within the industry to kind of come up with ways to regulate?
My opinion is that definitely literacy has increased a lot since the Cambridge Analytica days. Especially in the last couple of years, not only from the regulators, but the consumers as well. They have a much better understanding around privacy, the value of their personal data. So all of these things are coming together to create a bit more of a critical thinking environment when it comes to, because for many years, the tech companies, it was free range. They could do pretty much because nobody knew what they were doing. It was very opaque. I think it got better. I will agree with you that maybe having some technocrats who are very specialized on what this implies, and not only what the industry is now, but what the industry is going to be in 5 years, right? AI and all of that. I think that will make for a bit more precise legislation. Understanding that legislation is usually going to be running behind for,
Yeah, one thing I wanted to talk about was Google's response. And Google said that the claims were speculative and opportunistic. And this was one of the few times where I felt like I was a little bit aligned with one of their responses, because I did feel like they brought up the fact that they give opportunities to a lot of smaller businesses that maybe wouldn't have been able to reach the same audiences without their technology. And the claims are literally speculative, and it's not on actual losses, which I was like, oh, I guess that's kind of true. So from my perspective, this is one of the, again, a lot of times I do feel like some of the antitrust stuff that's happening, that's a little bit more on the nose. That's in maybe like the DOJ suit in America with their privacy sandbox and kind of the monopolizing of their ad tech. Whereas this one I felt was a little bit more like people who felt they got the short end of the stick, kind of saying like, hey, we want some of that pie. Yeah.
Well, that's always been, I think that's been one of the criticisms of sort of EU regulation when it comes to big tech. I think that, the idea is that they fine Google, Facebook, Amazon, billions of euros on a regular basis, right? And it's kind of like, they know they won't really fix it, but, Google's just like, okay, fine, we'll pay the fine, it's no problem, right? And so this could be a little bit of that where, Google will say, okay, fine, we agree, here you go, here's the money. And so it could be that, right? It's like the EU tax, right? But I agree, it is speculative. And I think also, this is just how people get their news also. So it's not only a question of just the advertising model, but it's also, as you mentioned, like how people are using the internet, right? And so if instead, for example, I live stream on YouTube, like the news, right? So I live stream Sky News, I live stream Al Jazeera, BBC, etc. And a lot of what I read are through Google inventory. So it is a bit of like the consumer behavior. So I could agree that maybe this is just like a cash grab of like, we need some money. Let's sue Google. And Google's like, fine, we'll pay.
Subsidize.
But I think this, to kind of segue into the second thing that I wanted to talk about, which is AI, right? So again, a lot of things are coming up around big tech. I think big tech has made it very clear that AI is the avenue that they see as their growth potential. Mark Zuckerberg actually was just in Japan a few weeks ago. Did you see the picture? He ate at McDonald's and was like, Japanese McDonald's is like the best McDonald's ever. But he was here to meet actually with Kishida-san, the prime minister, to discuss AI and sort of Japan's future. Obviously, Japan has made a huge push to develop more AI. I think this is largely driven by some of the population concerns and what would the job market look like. Anyway, big tech has gotten behind AI, and there's a number of controversies already arising. One of the biggest ones over the last few weeks is when OpenAI revealed their new text-to-video product, Sora, which I think there was a collective jaw drop across the internet, and the videos I saw on Twitter, I was like, what? That's crazy. And so I think everyone was really excited. This is like a new step into human creativity. I think it probably completely eclipsed, I think, how people felt about ChatGPT when it first came out. So everyone's quite excited. But what's happened over last week is the dust has kind of settled on the excitement, and now everyone's a bit concerned about what this means. And there seems to be kind of two camps of criticism. One camp is purely, this is the first example of how AI could destroy society. They talk about things like deep fakes, they talk about things like copyright issues and infringement, and what that could do to, let's say, help propaganda or things within this political sphere. And then the other component seems to be sort of employment and the removal and depletion of jobs, particularly artists who work, freelance artists and different ones who work in this space. So I'm wondering first, what were your thoughts about Sora when you saw it for the first time? And then a little bit about what your take. Do you think the controversy and the concern is hyperbolic, or are we actually in for something quite maybe sinister a bit later?
I saw the video and I couldn't believe it was AI. I was really, really impressed. And then I think it was last week, those images of Donald Trump with the African American community came through,
Yeah.
and again, super realistic. And then you will notice things like one of the characters on those pictures have 3 arms, right?
Yeah.
So AI is just a thing of extremes. You will have these
Yeah.
amazing depictions of whatever, and then this kind of bizarre, 5 fingers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we are really in uncharted territory. I have seen in the last year this huge increment of AI experts in LinkedIn when a technology
Yeah.
that just didn't exist before that. So I think it's pretty much going to be, we don't know where we are going.
Yeah.
An interesting connection maybe to the point that we had before about the EU and big tech, very relevant to AI, because I feel like in the EU, privacy is a fundamental human right.
Yeah.
And I think and it's not the same in other territories, in other parts of the world, right? So I think that puts the European Union at odds with the technology companies at a fundamental level that might not be present in other places. And then there's that friction happening. And I think it's just going to get worse as, as technology just keep leapfrogging through things that we thought it would take 20 years to get there, and they are just happening overnight. As you mentioned.
And I mean, there is, there is examples already. I mean, you mentioned the Donald Trump video, but there is some sort of real life scenario. So there was, for those of you who don't know, a few months ago there was an election in Slovakia. And a couple of weeks before the election, there was a release of audio footage, where the opposition candidate was talking about how he and his group had rigged the election and how they had done all of these things to ensure that they would win the election. Subsequently, it came out, well, first of all, he lost, but subsequently it came out that that entire conversation was a deep fake, that he was not there, this conversation did not happen. They used his voice, put it through an AI funnel, and basically was able to create this conversation. Now, whether or not that led to his losing the election is sort of still inconclusive. But what it showed was that there is a real concern with how, if you think about, like, we all work in an industry, a technology industry, a very advanced industry, so we can understand the levels of AI technology. But when you're talking to a general public and you're showing them or allowing them to see or hear this audio tape, it's very hard to sort of explain to people, well, this isn't really me. And people are like, well, how is it not you? It sounds like you. It looks like you. And so I think there's a real concern in sort of, like you mentioned earlier, we have to quickly kind of educate the populace on, I think, AI, because I think that's where the real danger is sort of people seeing things and believing them and not having the critical thinking enough to sort of say, like you mentioned, why does this person have 3 eyes in the back of this image? I don't think everyone would notice that right away. I mean, am I being a little hyperbolic, or like...
I don't know. I'm like tinfoil hat for this a bit. Like, I think, because the opposite is also true, right? Like, people could say, like, oh, this is fake. And it's like, it's the real video of them doing whatever they're saying they're not doing.
That's true.
And which to me, and like, we're talking about the lawsuits, and Elon Musk is suing OpenAI, which I thought it's like the first time in a long time where I also agreed with Elon Musk on something where I was just like,
You're like batting for the other side for both things. Okay, that's cool though. That's cool.
it's like I said, it's the first time for a long time where like Elon Musk like said something that I really like was like, oh my god, like this guy, he's smart actually, but like mostly because he was like, I was part of this like NPO basically like a nonprofit organization,
Yeah.
and suddenly it's like a for profit, and
Yeah.
like they made it very clear by reinstating Sam Altman as the CEO, and to me like I think Sam Altman does a really good job of getting trust by saying like, "Oh, we need legislation and stuff," but I don't know how much he's really doing to like get that to happen.
Yeah.
And so I think he's really more like the like you guys should believe OpenAI and like we're not doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
It's all above board. And to me, it just seems a little bit like it's going in a direction that's very clearly focused on profit and not the original mission of bettering humanity, which
Yeah.
is why Elon Musk is angry, which is why I found myself agreeing with Elon Musk for the first time. I do think there's a lot of danger, and I do think that legislation, is it going to move fast enough? And it's kind of what you were saying with big tech also. Yeah, I'm not sure that we're in a position where, especially in America, which is where I'm from, it's not going to move fast enough. I can see it now.
I think if history is to be trusted, every time a technology company says, trust us, we will, that's a recipe for disaster. It's interesting what you mentioned, Joshua, that your diet of news, the channels they are coming from. I do think like the erosion of traditional media outlets, right, where there is an editorial supervision, content, obviously that has decreased, especially, younger generations where they just kind of picking their news from. But at some point, there has to be some sort of critical view of, is this source of information to be trusted? Where is this coming from? And I think that's becoming less and less a guiding principle for a healthy news diet or information diet of any sort, right? And I do feel that's an issue that is just going to continue. And at the point where you just don't know, the BBC had this little, I don't know if they do it as a rolling activity, but they kind of certify if there is a fake image or video, whatever, or if it's not, right? And it has like a seal of approval. Maybe that's the way forward to have some sort of governance around what is reliable and what is not, because it's getting very, very confusing.
Yeah, for sure.
It's really like an extreme version of like Twitter wasn't able to really do anything to police fake news at the time. Like they put like this questionable label, but it didn't do anything to stop the spread.
Right.
And maybe it slowed the spread. Maybe I'm not giving it enough credit, but it definitely, the problem exists still, and it's only going to get worse from here. And so, I think for me, the other part that's kind of scary is, like if you're looking at the video, you can kind of see, oh, maybe something's weird. But then if there's like so many videos, like how you can't take the time to examine them all super closely, and the quality doesn't even have to be that great to make it look realistic, because a lot of these, like if it's like a fake recording of someone, like you could assume like, oh, their phone is in their pocket, so it sounds distorted or something. And so there's a lot of ways to rationalize the falsities.
Well, now that was all doom and gloom, let's talk about the exciting parts of AI. Because we were like, oh, it's horrible. No, so one of the interesting things that I was quite excited about with Sora, that I think will move into like the key point of the discussion for today, which is e-commerce, is the ability to develop. Like, I am not what I would say like a creative person, and there are a number of times when I am pitching an idea, a concept of some kind, and I swear that Dolly and Midjourney have changed my ability to pitch concepts to clients, right? Because instead of imagine with me, I can actually have a visual thing. And so it's really helped me in that way to do that. And now to be able to do that from text to video, I think is going to be a game changer. And so I think for the advertising industry in particular, I think for clients, I think this is going to be very interesting. One of the big arguments that I always make is for dynamic creative adaptation. And sometimes you'll have clients say, well, making paying for 5 video assets is super expensive, or, having the talent for this amount of time we can't really give you that many variations of creative. And it seems like one of the things that Sora might be able to help with is that ability to have more dynamic creative, which I think inherently will affect marketing. Because imagine if all brands were finally able to have a level of personalization with creativity, how that would not only change sort of their brand awareness efforts, but how that would change sort of e-commerce in general. If you were able to have very specific product creative, very specific product visuals for each of the things. And I think this is going to have a huge effect on e-commerce in general. And so that being said, segueing into like our main topic, which is about e-commerce. First, I just want to kind of start like sort of a very macro level of e-commerce in Japan, because Japan is a market where things that I've heard is it's a market where, given its literacy with technology, it should be a really big e-commerce market, and it is. But some say it's not as big as it should be, right? That there is still a preference to in-store shopping, in-store buying, etc. At the same time, you have two huge players in the market, Amazon and Rakuten, who dominate different sectors. And so I think first let's talk a little bit about that. Maybe Alfonso, you can help me a bit more, but like just the e-commerce market in general in Japan, how would you kind of explain it in sort of in its broader sense?
Yeah, so in terms of size or volume, I think it's about 93 billion USD in terms of goods being shipped around. Out of that, about 2.4 billion is retail media, which comes to about 2.5%. And I think that's already an indication. So it's a sizable market. But the media investment, it's a traditional B2C company will be spending like 5 to 10% of their business volume into marketing. But the media that is moving is quite small, right? So I think that is an indication. It's growing quite healthy, I would say, between 7 and 10% year on year. COVID play a very strong role in getting it, what you were mentioning before. I think it's a much developed state now than it might have been 5 years ago. So there has, and that 10% growth is very continuing in Japan at the moment. Interestingly, I think it's about 20% of cross-border. So a lot of overseas companies either selling products in Japan, which I think is the most useful, or some Japanese companies selling products overseas. So I think that give it, if we all have had that experience of trying to find something that you didn't think you will find in Japan, it's in Amazon or Rakuten. So that kind of trans-border, like Amazon in Korea doesn't have a huge penetration, but Korean companies, they can sell in Japan. I think it gives it a certain flexibility. So those two things, like low level of retail media spending and that kind of flexibility of bringing on and taking products, those are two interesting characteristics of the market.
And do you think the low level, is it kind of a cause and effect? Like, is the low level of retail media spending contributing to a lower level of e-commerce than is expected, or are the brands just sort of reflecting like how their products are sold, if that makes sense? So like, are the advertisers saying, well, the majority of our business is in store, so therefore it doesn't make sense for us to invest more in retail media? Or is it the fact that they're not investing in retail media, that they're not seeing the e-commerce results that they could be, if that makes sense?
Yeah, my feeling is that it might be a case of silos. Like some of these activities, they're really working in specific silos. One of the things we are trying to do at Jellyfish is kind of create that kind of omni-channel overall strategy and connect those different pieces. But I think it might be a case where companies say, well, we are selling this product, right? Media is something that doesn't really affect me. Well, retail media in an environment where attribution can be so precise, that should go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So I think there is still a need for connecting the dots across when it comes. People might be doing it very well. Companies might be doing very well in the omni-channel, traditional digital marketing environment. I think within e-commerce and retail, there's still work to be done for that. That's my feeling.
It's interesting that you mentioned also sort of foreign companies selling in Japan, because I have worked on a number of domestic companies in my time here, and one of the interesting things that I always say is I think I read somewhere that like city planning in Tokyo, for example, plays a role in low e-commerce because, as you all know, whether you're at Shibuya, Shinjuku, Ikebukuro, etc., there's always a Uniqlo, there's always a big camera, there's always a convenience store, and so this idea of buying like kind of everyday use products online, a lot of the advertisers I worked with, that was really challenging because people would just be like, well, I can just go to the store and get it. And so it does seem like the times where I think e-commerce is being quite successful are with products that are not made here. Instagram, I get a lot of ads for products that are made in the US or in Korea, etc. Another market that go ahead.
Can I just have, I have one anecdote about that specific city planning stuff. I will not buy things on e-commerce to my own detriment occasionally. Like there were like, it's so, if it's something I know I can get at the company or at the pharmacy, like down the street, I'll just be like, oh no, I'll get it when I'm coming home, or I'll get it like when I'm picking up my daughter. And I'll forget to get it for like days or weeks. And it's like, if I had just ordered it, I would have had it already. And another time I bought like, I have like nose strips for snoring. So because I snore really loud and my wife gets really mad at me. So I was like, I'm going to try to wear these nose strips and hopefully not wake her up. And I bought them. And I was like, for like more than a week, I was like, I'll buy them. Forgot to buy them. Eventually I got them, brought them home. No idea where they are. And like, if I had just ordered it, I know I would have just gotten the package, opened it, and then put them in like my bathroom or wherever I needed them. And so it's surreal to me to think that like this convenience of where things are located really overtakes habits that I've even had like since before moving to Japan.
It's funny because I think one of the things that I think Amazon is doing really well is promoting this sort of subscription model. So for example, I love Febreze. I have bottles of Febreze in my house. I Febreze literally everything. And I always think I should order this online because I always, like you, I'm like, I'm going to pick up Febreze before I go home. And so now I've gotten on the subscription model, and now Febreze just shows up to my house. And so I think that works really well because it is this idea of like, particularly with daily use products for me, like I don't really realize I need it until I'm out of it. Like I'll go to do laundry and I'm like, oh shit, I don't have laundry detergent. I'll get some tomorrow, right? But with this kind of subscription model, then you're like, okay, maybe if I don't have to think about it, then that makes sense, right?
And I think that there's an element of behavioral adjustment that comes into play, similar to, for example, what Netflix did with watching, right? You kind of adjusted your behavior to being watching, like Marvel movies did, like people stay until the end of the credits. So in a way, I think subscription programs like Amazon have, maybe you're reluctant to do it, and then you do it one, and then you fall into this certain pattern, and then it's like a bit of an slope. At our house is the same. We started with one thing, now it's the coffee, and everything drops out. But there is still, again, as you mentioned, is that the brick and mortar store reliance in Japan, where you just kind of walk up the door, you get there. So that's a very interesting dynamic, and I think it's not one or the other. I think there is a balance. You could and should do both, but maybe we can go into it.
No, I agree. I think it's one of those interesting things, and I will say one of the things, and this is not to just promote Amazon, but one of the things that I have to admit as someone whose Japanese is not great, the ability to order things in Amazon in English is a huge like value proposition for someone like myself. But I want to talk a bit about the other player in the space just for a little bit, which is Rakuten, which is obviously a huge player, dominates in many ways across areas of e-commerce, but they have an entire ecosystem, which is, very generally a Japanese company. Most Japanese companies have a number of different services that they offer. And there was something that I thought was really interesting. I watched a CNBC video about Amazon versus Rakuten in Japan, and there was a really interesting insight, and I would love to get your thoughts. So what they said is, why do some Japanese consumers prefer Rakuten over Amazon or Amazon over Rakuten? So the idea was that Rakuten is very much a marketplace that has a level of discoverability. You go to Rakuten, you put in something, but also people just go through Rakuten shops. It's literally like a digital mall. Whereas with Amazon, there's more intentionality. I don't know if that's a word, but there's more intentionality behind it. Most people go on Amazon not to sort of browse. They go on Amazon because they need X, and then they look for it, and then they find it, and then it's delivered. And so they were saying that this is why there's a space for both of these players in Japan, is because e-commerce shoppers differ in people like yourself, which is like, I just want this thing, versus some people who are like, no, I want to sort of scroll several websites and discover what's interesting. And so I just wanted to know, like, first of all, do either of you use or have used Rakuten? Do you have a preference for one or the other, and like, why? Or Instagram also is obviously.
I mean,
I know you love Instagram, but only Rakuten and Amazon for now.
I have purchased stuff from Rakuten. Actually, some like vitamins I get from Rakuten specifically, and I had subscribed for a little bit. And I don't know why that is. Like, I don't know if I didn't find them on Amazon, or maybe it was just like the first search result, because it seems weird in retrospect. But then the other thing, I bought like a used PlayStation on Rakuten Ichiba, which was also surprising to me. That's another thing where I was definitely like on Mercari, like looking, and then decided to go with like Rakuten. I think there's a little bit more of like this is protected by Rakuten's like warranty or whatever. And so that felt a little bit safer. But my wife, I know, shops on, like, talking about just like scrolling through things, like she'll be on like Shein or Mercari or Rakuten occasionally, especially if like she has like an idea of like, oh, I want to build this kind of shelf in our house. Like, she'll just be like on those sites, like looking at things constantly. Or like for Halloween, we wanted to do these specific costumes, and she was like looking at all these different sites. Like she's very thorough, where I'm like the opposite. I'm just like, okay, what's the fastest thing I can get? Like, oh, it's here. Like, this is the first one. Like, just order it now. And so I do see that sort of duality.
So actually, Rakuten skews very female, and apparently it's because of the points, right? So I think Amazon now is about 35% of the market. Rakuten is about 30. Yahoo Shopping, it stays about 12, and then it's everything else. The interesting thing is that Amazon has grown like 45% in the last 2 years, and they are doing a big investment in Japan, right, up to $8 billion. The thing that it catches my eye, so Rakuten, they have like more of, I don't know if traditional is the right word to use it, but it's more conservative Ichiba, like marketplace. Now, Amazon, they have what they call the endemic and the non-endemic clients, right? So they have the endemic clients, who are the brands who sell on the store. And they know they are going to win that battle there. But then they have the non-endemic play, which is, okay, you might be a car manufacturer, you might be a travel agency, you are not going to sell your products through the platform, but you can still leverage our data points, you can still leverage our media. And that's a really interesting play for me, because they know the value of what they have, and they are looking with a very broad perspective. And so I think that will definitely be an edge as we move forward, and companies realize the value of data. So very different.
Is that happening in other markets too, or is that
Japan? That's a global. So endemic, non-endemic, that's a play. And I think in Japan, obviously with Rakuten, there's a strong local player in there. But that non-endemic, that providing services to companies who you will not expect to find in the environment, that suddenly opens a lot of doors.
Can you give an example of what that would look like?
Yeah, so for example, with Jellyfish, we work with a global automotive company, right? So when you buy, I don't know if you guys drive or you like tinker with the car, so I have a motorbike, I have a Ducati, and it's really hard to find pieces, right? So if I go to Amazon, and I look, a replacement, whatever it is for my Ducati, then you can register your car or bike model, right? And then it will be what is called My Garage. And then every time you go, they can recommend pieces for you. Now, all that data is very significant. In my case, if they provide that information to Ducati, then they can generate a segment and they have a DSP that targets people who have a Ducati. So, and you are not going to be able to buy that motorbike on the store, but that creates an additional business. You can tap into revenue that was outside of your purview once you start doing that, which I think is very interesting.
Amazon probably has one, like compared to Google, maybe a little bit less. Compared to Facebook or Instagram, even, I don't know, Instagram always wins but Amazon has a very, I say this, but I'm thinking about how many times I've bought stuff on Instagram. But I say this, but Amazon has a really strong idea, I mean, literally, of what you buy. Like, they know everything. And so I think to have that access to those segments, I think is powerful.
I think the main thing I probably buy on e-commerce platforms are books, because it's very difficult to get English books here sometimes. And then I've tried to incorporate more kind of daily use products into my life. But it is really interesting also what you mentioned about sort of the demographics between Amazon and Rakuten, because I think, for example, Rakuten for a long time has been incredibly popular because of the Rakuten credit card, which has, I think, a very sort of generous point system. People sort of rave about how really valuable those points can be. A lot of my friends have the Rakuten card. It was like the first credit card that they got. Both Japanese and foreigners. It was like, that was the first credit card that I got. And this entire ecosystem that they've built around sort of using the platform. What's interesting is with Amazon, they've released obviously an Amazon credit card that now has a very sort of similar generous point system. Also, I've heard that one of the things that has really contributed also to Amazon growth is Prime, right? And Prime Video in particular. And if you look at the amount of, interestingly enough, Japanese content on Amazon Prime has been incredibly successful, I think, in sort of getting people to sign up as a gateway to sort of using more Amazon. So it'll be interesting to see how those things sort of play out. But I mean, how important do you think like benefits and additional services like play into that? Is like, obviously, do you guys use like Rakuten points or Amazon points, or is that like a consideration process for you when you like are purchasing things online, or not at all?
I used to be really after the Rakuten points, but I think convenience and also a unified experience, right? Like you said before, in Amazon is one environment. You go there, you know where things are. You kind of. I think convenience it's now trumping the need for like points that then my wife goes and redeems every 6 months, right? So we are now a household where we purchase mostly from Amazon.
Same.
Yeah, I purchase more from Amazon for sure, but I am a Rakuten Mobile member, and so I do get points through Rakuten Mobile, but I don't ever use. And I remember seeing my point total at one time, and my wife was like, "What? How do you use it? Like, you should be checking that or using those." And I was like, "I don't even know how to like access them."
No, it's interesting. So one of the things I want to circle back to is now sort of retail media spending. And so you had mentioned, Alfonso, that it's low where then it should be. How should brands think about e-commerce in Japan? Because I know, again, I spent a lot of time reading CNBC. There was a really great CNBC short video about sort of DTC, and they were saying, one of the things that was really amazing, or has been really amazing for the US e-commerce system, is sort of these DTC players that came into the space, right? A lot of these companies went like direct to consumer, online only, and it sort of really drove that market. And so that is a lot of it, and I think Amazon greatly benefits from that, which is this sort of American consumer demand for DTC brands and products. In Japan in particular, what do you think are probably some of the biggest challenges for brands when it comes to e-commerce, and then how do you think they can fix that if they can?
Yeah, I think as far as I can tell, speaking to some clients, I think still the e-commerce seems to be, like I mentioned before, maybe this kind of silo where you just put these efforts, but it doesn't really necessarily need to be connected to anything else. Amazon, of course, offers all these advertising solutions and dashboard that you can log into and look at. But as long as you do that, I think you are going to be missing a holistic view of your activities, right? And at the end of the day, even if you have the best performance in Amazon, that's just one of the channels that you want to be working as a brand, right? So I think particularly for Japan, companies will benefit from having an omni-channel view that looks at performance and looks at investment in a single login. And then you have in there all, it can be the Rakuten, it can be the Amazon, but very importantly, that's for e-commerce, but then you can integrate as well everything outside of there. So you can compare apples to apples when you are looking at e-commerce investment and retail media, and then anything that it sits outside of that area. So having that single view, that kind of omni-channel perception, I think that is going to be that's the way where you connect the dots, everything comes together, and then you can make informed decisions across all those pieces, right? So, for example, my company Jellyfish, we are basically a digitalization. We are called an agency, which we are, but it's more of a digitalization engine. So, for example, the way that we structure when we approach projects is like, okay, get your data aligned and get your data sorted out, then look at what the data is telling you, look at the insights, what are the discoveries you're making, and then action on those insights, right? Usually through media. So when you connect those three things, that can be applied to e-commerce, can be applied to programmatic search, whatever it is. So for example, one of the solutions that we have for e-commerce that we are just coming to market with it will be around, okay, you have your e-commerce environment, right? You are looking at the products you're putting there. You should be also looking about the performance of your retail media, right? Which is very important. But you should also be looking at how to leverage your first-party data. How can you have a clean room, data clean room, where you can ingest your data and connect with other pieces, right? But you can also look at how you are generating content. Are you using AI to automatize your copy or your images, so you are kind of hyper-personalizing to the product and to the person, right? And finally, how do you connect that to your omni-channel, right? So if you get your retail, your data, you get your content all sorted out, and you integrate that with your larger media strategy, then it all comes together, right? And then it's not commerce and everything else. It's kind of, and at the end of the day, I think we did work with a cosmetic French company, and it was a very interesting thing because we started with a $10,000 contract to look at retail. It was just an audit, right? And then we got a larger contract for retail media. But then when they were looking at that, it's like, well, we don't really know who's coming to our website. And then they invested in analytics, right? Completely out of the purview of e-commerce. But they realized they needed these two things to be able to compare how things were moving inside the ecosystem and outside the ecosystem of the e-commerce.
No, that's super interesting. I have two questions. Well, one comment and then two questions. But I'll start with the questions, which is probably, for people who don't know, we should define what you mean by retail media and how that's different from, let's say, traditional media or the different sort of terms for media. So when we talk about retail media specifically, what are we referring to?
So in my view, it might not be a textbook's response, but it's basically any media that you leverage within an e-commerce environment, right? So for example, you mentioned before Amazon. So Amazon will have sponsor ads. It will have display ads through the integrated DSP that they have. They have things like Prime Video. They have affiliated websites. So every channel of communication to engage the customer that you can use within the ecosystem environment, that's what I will define as retail media. And the interesting thing about that is because it is a closed environment of sort, if it's within Amazon or within Yahoo Japan or then attribution and performance is very well connected, right? So you can know your investment on media. That's why I was surprised that Japan has such a that 2.5% of investment. Because if you're going to invest in media, e-commerce is an excellent environment because you will know every single dollar that you invest, how is that performing your single ad, because it's all connected within the environment.
Yeah. So that's perfect. That's how I was gonna explain it too.
Just what I was.
Just exactly what I thought. So one of the things you mentioned also was silos, and I find this, as someone who also works at an agency, I find this to be the biggest challenge in sort of omni-channel marketing, which is generally your media team is a very different, almost unrelated, unconnected team from your e-commerce team. They have very different objectives. Very often those objectives conflict with each other, particularly if you have the media team, which is focusing more on upper funnel activations, awareness, brand marketing, etc. And then you've got an e-commerce team who tends to be more analytics driven, more data driven. And so a lot of times some of the challenges in sort of optimizing overall e-commerce is really this sort of disconnect between these two very important entities within a brand sort of marketing division. Do you find that to be the case? And if so, how does Jellyfish and like your team at Jellyfish deal with those siloed structures? Like how do you, as you just explained, sort of making this sort of full funnel approach to e-commerce, like how do you get those conversations to happen like that?
Yeah, I do think that's the case. I think these are two, at the core, they are the same thing. I think we artificially decided to separate them at some point in the distant past. I think one step comes through mindset and operational processes, right? Understanding that this is, at the end of the day, if you're a company A, you're a consumer good products, your objective is to service your consumers and to provide, it doesn't matter the channel, right? So kind of breaking down walls between what it might be the e-commerce team who says, no, only I understand retail, and the programmatic team that says, no, only I understand how DSPs work. When at the end of the day, it's like engaging the consumer, right? So they come together. Also, it might be technical, right? So we do have a platform called Insights. Ignite. My boss is gonna kill me. But it is what it allows you is it doesn't matter what is the channel that you are using for your e-commerce, right? Because Amazon will have their own, login and environment and UI, and Rakuten will have a different one. So it's all different, right? So as a brand, you want to just have a holistic view of it. Like one login, that's one of the most underappreciated powers in modern world. You just want log in one thing and just be able to see everything, right? So having that kind of technology stack that allows you to integrate different things and then be able to compare, I think that's quite important, and that will go a long way. But in parallel, there has to be a certain modification on the understanding and the working process, saying, look, these things are not two different things. You need to put this together, and because we are all digital citizens, right? So you might be in Amazon, but then after that you are in an open internet website, right? So communicating with you, Bryan, in one place or the other, that has to be linked, and that if it's a brand, let's say a luxury brand, that custom created engagement and hyper personalized messaging, that's so important. It just doesn't matter where it happens.
It's very true. And even from our, I'm brand side, and so our brand, Wahl+Case, just even connecting those dots for us, we don't have an e-commerce platform, obviously. And so, but even just connecting those dots across all of our owned and operated channels is a struggle. And I think having that idea of a one login dashboard we can see everything is super valuable.
Yeah. Well, I guess as a last part of the conversation, because we started out talking about AI and all of that, what do you guys think is the future of e-commerce? Or do you think, as we talked about in the beginning, I witnessed in Japan how quickly COVID accelerated the use of e-commerce in Japan. It was crazy. I remember reading stories about old Japanese grandmas ordering thousands of yen worth of stuff because they would just like push the buttons, right? And everybody was sort of getting very comfortable with ordering online because we had to as a necessity. And then I saw a few articles and a few research reports that showed there was a dip again once things started to open up, because there is still in many cases a preference to the store. Um, and now it seems to kind of have rebalanced after some time. But I'm wondering, in Japan in particular, what do you think is the future of e-commerce? I know live commerce is something that has come up quite a lot in Japan. Obviously, as someone who works primarily with luxury clients, live commerce in Korea and China have been huge and incredibly successful. The adoption of live commerce in Japan is still relatively low compared to other markets. Obviously, things like AR, VR have been many conversations that I've had in the e-commerce space, which is, AR versions of bags and shoes that can appear in front of you, and then you can, spin it and try it on and virtually try it on, and all of these sorts of things, which I think are trying to push that e-commerce experience. But I'm wondering, what you guys think would be, what's like the future of e-commerce? Will we all be wearing VR headsets and just shopping, or what do you think it'll look like?
I think maybe it's funny you said that, because Luxottica just made a partnership, may have been, so the largest sunglasses manufacturer in the world just made an alliance with either Microsoft or to create the VR set. So I think you might not be too far off.
I'm sure it's going to be soon.
Yeah, I kind of feel that we might be going in two directions, right? One is definitely AI, but AI in backend applications, so forecasting, supply chain, logistics. I think they might have a very strong impact in there, and companies are getting very good at that. But if you can, because in retail and e-commerce, your stock is so important, right?
Yeah.
Within Amazon, if you are not replenishing your stock, you might have the best product in the world, but your ranking goes down.
Yeah.
So AI will play a part of that. I also think it's going to be down to what I mentioned before, hyper-personalization of your content, right? Yeah. And for example, us at Jellyfish, we do have a content service, and we work with brands who maybe need 20 different languages across 20 different countries for a set of ads. And we can do that, but obviously there is an investment of time and effort in there. Once AI and Gen AI is already on, and we do have a subsidiary company called Pencil, where we can create those variations with a human intervention for quality control that service to brands. Suddenly, not just the cost and investment for the brand comes down, but also how fast they can adjust the creative, the content to the to every single ad or segment. It just grows exponentially, right? Yeah. And obviously, as a consumer, the more tailored that is for your needs, the better. Yeah. As the brand, if you can deliver 20 different variations instead of 5, what you mentioned about your clients, and it's still the same price, then obviously that has value. So I think that's going to be AI. It's going to have a substantial impact. The other one that we might have been underestimating, but I think it's going to become quite important, is sustainability.
Yeah.
So as you probably know now, you can track. So where metrics have been traditionally, like page view, impressions, things like that. Now we have a metric that can be, well, what is the carbon footprint of this ad that you are delivering, right? And empower consumers are taking account on that and realizing that they can hold their brands accountable to how sustainable their advertising and their marketing is, right? Yeah. So I think that might become in the short future something that brands adopt, because consumers, they take notice and they realize and they say, look, you have to be responsible on this front. So
I mean, even Amazon directly now will ask you if you want fewer boxes, right? Mm-hmm. So like, if you wait a day, we can send everything in one box, versus I never wait, but if you can wait a day, you can send everything in one box. But no, I think it's super interesting. I'm excited to see how sort of e-commerce develops. I hope that I do like buying things in the store, but I think it's figuring out that balance between what you shouldn't have to think about, like your, what was it? The breathable strips, which should come on a regular basis, because otherwise there'll be marital fights. Versus, I do think there are some things that people are always going to prefer to buy in the store. I think there is an inherent joy and feeling of euphoria when you buy something new. I know in luxury it's a huge thing to buy things new. There's a lot of research that happens before the decision-making process, but I think there are some markets where, or some industries and some particular products that are going to be that. And then it's how do you create exciting new ways to shop, which is, VR headsets or
Generative
metaverse
AI.
or AI or AR or VR. So
So in that sense, Joshua, I'm
yeah.
curious because that's your area. How do you think you can replicate that premium customer attention and location visit from luxury in the digital space?
Yeah, so what we see is like there's a couple ways that brands are doing it. So the first one is there's a huge movement in virtual try-on and AR VR, because I think the idea is there's a huge amount of when you're going to purchase a luxury item, there's a huge amount of consideration that goes into that for most people. I mean, they're thinking about it anywhere from a month to 3 months, because you're about to spend in yen hundreds of thousands of yen, if not a million yen for something, right? So one of the things that I talk about a lot is how do you inject technology into being part of the overall sort of store experience. And so you see a lot of brands, for example, already having virtual try-ons, AR. I worked with friends on a project that had virtual try-on. It was, I think, Ralph Lauren in line, and they had virtual try-on shoes. You can now do virtual try-on bags, knowing that still that purchase is going to happen in the store, but at least there is an element of discoverability online. The other thing that you see happening is, and this is still sort of evolving, but like for example, Amazon is really pushing to eventually bring luxury to their platform. Obviously, there's a couple of things that they have to do in making sure that things are, not counterfeit and that there are valid purchases. And so I think that is a discussion that is happening in terms of what would that look like? I think that's with luxury goods. Luxury beauty, I think, has been incredibly successful in leveraging the data of Amazon, because what has been really great for Amazon, I think, and Rakuten as well, is when we talk about luxury skincare or beauty and makeup products in general, those are things that you can buy on Amazon. And so even leveraging that data, you see a lot of luxury brands who may not have their own products available on Amazon, but using the data to say, hey, we know that this person has a high propensity to buy skincare, we should use that. And then I think I would say the third thing is hyper personalization. So one of the things that I talk about a lot is very rarely in luxury is your first luxury purchase something incredibly expensive. For most people, the first luxury purchase is a fragrance. You buy, Dior Sauvage, you buy Chanel number 5, etc. Or it's a small leather good, a wallet in Japan, a card holder, etc. So what you see a lot of luxury brands doing is using digital and specifically e-commerce as a way to sell those particular products, right? Because if you're going to buy, I don't know, a 500,000, 600,000 yen bag from, Louis Vuitton, you're not going to buy that online. You're going to want to go see it, touch it, feel it. But what you might buy is you might buy a small wallet, you might buy a small card holder, you might buy makeup products. We talk a lot about in luxury the lipstick economy. So you might buy, a foundation or a sunscreen or a lipstick. So that's where e-commerce in luxury is really working. And what's been really great is when you start to push that and people start to buy those items, then they're in your, as you mentioned, they're in your CRM, they're in your database, and then you can sort of, resell them again and again on these sort of small goods. So I think that's what it is either one, technology, AR, VR, even metaverse to a certain degree, although I'm still not convinced people like to shop in the metaverse. But AR, VR, definitely. Entry-level items being primarily focused on digital e-commerce and sort of saying, hey, buy these small things here, I think are some of the ways that you're seeing luxury do that. I don't think I would say repeat purchasers as well, but I don't think, and I don't think this will change. I could be wrong in eating my words later. I don't think, unfortunately, that the experience of buying, I mean, if you think about the psychological reasons that people buy luxury, it's very largely about success, feeling a certain level of euphoria and being able to afford something that's incredibly expensive and exclusive. At the moment, that cannot be replicated online. If I've saved, my last 3 salaries to go buy something from Dior, I'd be damned if I'm going to buy it online and it show up in a box at my house, right? I'm going to go in the store and purchase it. But what brands can do, let's say Dior, for example, is now that person has bought a bag from you, they're in your ecosystem. Luxury brands are they're very efficient at getting all of your information when you purchase something. Then maybe Dior can say, okay, you bought a bag from us. What about a lipstick? What about a sunscreen? What about this? And that can drive, I think, e-commerce there. So until the luxury e-commerce experience is as nice as the luxury store experience, I think it'll always be preferentially in store, but I think you can make little steps to improve certain experiences with sort of entry-level products, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much for being here, Alfonso. Can you give us just a rundown of the products and services that Jellyfish offers?
Yes, so actually this is very timely because now in March, April, we are coming to market with a new e-commerce solution that we have been working as we're one of the premium global partners for Amazon. So have been working with them globally for a while now. So we finally are able to launch that service here in Japan. But overall, we can support companies in everything that has to do with analytics, data, media, and kind of put it all together. So I might have mentioned it before, rather than thinking of a Jellyfish as an agency, which we are, it's more of a digitalization agent that can help companies to go through that process and kind of, I keep using this word, but I find it so powerful, just connecting the dots and making sure that everything it's on the same line and you have visibility as a brand of where you are, what you're spending, and what you are getting in return.
Perfect. Thank you so much.